It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Joe Schwarcz. Dr. Schwarcz is the founding director of McGill's Office for Science and Society that sends a weekly digest separating sense from nonsense. Not always an easy task. Dr. Schwarcz is well known for his informative and entertaining public lectures on topics ranging from the chemistry of food to the connection between the body and the mind. Professor Schwarcz has received numerous awards for teaching chemistry and interpreting science for the public. He was awarded the Montreal Medal, recognizing a lifetime contribution to chemistry in Canada, and the Ballas Prize for critical thinking by the US-based Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He was the recipient of McGill's Principals Prize for Public Engagement through the Media, and he's the author of 20 books and also has been awarded 4 honorary degrees. And so Professor Schwarcz didn't want me to read so much, but anyway, I'll carry on just a bit. He's the host of the Dr. Joe Show on Montreal CGAD and has appeared hundreds of times on the Discovery Channel, CTV, CBC, TV Ontario, and Global Television. And he writes a newspaper column entitled A Grain of Salt. And he's also an amateur magician and often spices up his presentations with a little magic. So, Dr. Schwarcz will enlighten us today on a serious and most topical issue, the age of misinformation and disinformation. Dr. Schwarcz.
Thank you. As you heard, I do direct McGill's Office for Science and Society, where we have the challenging task of separating sense from nonsense and myth from fact. We do this without any conflict of interest. It makes no difference to me or to my staff whether or not any food or drug or cosmetic is regulated or not. The only thing that matters is that whatever decision is arrived at is based on science and not on emotion and not on hearsay. So being a professor, let me start with a professorial story. One day a prof was talking to a large class, and he walks over to the side of the lecture room and he picks up a bottle with a wriggling live worm in it. And he pours in a little bit of tobacco juice and the worm dies. He does it again with a second worm and pours in a little bit of alcohol and the worm dies. And does it one more time with a little bit of chocolate syrup and the worm dies. And then he looks out at the students. He says, "What do you make of that?" And one inventive guy in the back said, Sir, I know if you drink, smoke, and eat chocolate, you don't have to worry about worms." He made the right observation, but came to the wrong conclusion. And science is all about making observations and coming to conclusions. And that has been really the message that we have been trying to send out for decades now. But there's more to interpreting science than just that. I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes. And the statement that it's a capital mistake to theorize before one has data because one insensibly begins to fit the data to theory instead of the other way around. And that really captures the problems that we have today, is that people do not understand facts, they don't know the difference between fact and the theory, and also between fact and nonsense. So I'm going to try to elaborate on this for you here this afternoon and give you perhaps a few ideas when you confront some of your friends who may have some mistaken beliefs. My background is chemistry, and I think that chemistry is the thread that ties all of the other sciences together. Chemistry is the study of matter and the changes that matter undergoes. And everything in the world is composed of matter, and our life depends on how that matter changes from one form to the other, whether it happens inside of our body or inside of our automobiles or inside of an airplane. So I think that chemistry should be in the limelight. But that view is not shared by everyone. There are those who think that chemistry is really the work of the devil, and who think that the word chemical is synonymous with toxin or with poison. They think that chemists are crazy people locked up in laboratories thinking about what new cancer-causing additive to unleash on the unsuspecting public. And they also think that we are a different breed from everyone else. And because of that, people yearn for a chemical-free existence. One of the greatest fallacies out there. Because indeed, if you're looking for something that is chemical-free, you are not getting a good deal. Because the only thing that is chemical-free is a vacuum. And that is not very nourishing. Everything in the world is made up of chemicals. Of course, chemical is not a dirty word. It is just an expression of all of the materials of which our world is composed. So chemicals are not to be feared. They're not to be worshipped either. They are just things. They are to be understood. They don't make any decisions. People make decisions. In order to make the right decisions about chemicals, obviously you have to have the proper information. But unfortunately, these days we're living in a world that is full of information, misinformation, and disinformation. Misinformation is information that is just plainly wrong. And the conveyor may not know that. I mean, we see this all the time on the internet. Someone opens up an email and just sends it on to someone else without really understanding. That's misinformation. Disinformation is the knowingly spreading of false information, and unfortunately, we have a great deal of that as well. This was very much brought home during COVID. Oh, that just gave free rein to the nonsense purveyors, many of whom were scientists and physicians, unbelievably. Like this critter, Dr. Madej, who is an osteopathic physician in the US, who believed that the COVID vaccines had some kind of chip in them that was being implanted into people. An absolute nonsensical belief. She also maintained that the vaccine itself was dangerous, and if somehow you were forced to get it, you better get rid of it from your body by taking a bath. And this bath was based on borax. You just sit in there, and obviously this is nonsense. And the cartoonists, of course, had a field day with this. And she was certainly not alone in this belief. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, who is all over the internet, believed that the whole COVID situation was dreamt up to cull the population of the world. So there's nonsense out there, and it's pervasive. And to me, one of the most disturbing ones is a guy who calls himself the people's chemist. And he is Shane Ellison, and he actually does have a scientific background, which makes it even more unbelievable. He did work in the pharmaceutical industry for a while, but now he has become a proponent of a chemical-free lifestyle. And this is very difficult to understand from someone who actually has a background in science and specifically in chemistry. Look what he promises. He promises to lead you down the path where you will not need any medications. Why? Because those are chemicals. So no more thyroid pills, no more antidepressants, no more cholesterol-lowering drugs. You don't want to have any of that because they are chemicals. So what is his answer to this? His chemical-free lifestyle, which really isn't that chemical-free. Because, for example, he will sell sarsaparilla blend testosterone supplement after telling you that the testosterone that is sold or that is used by the pharmaceutical industry is a poison. Well, this concoction actually contains some sterols, but these are not at all the same as the anabolic steroids, and the body does not convert them to testosterone. This is just nonsense. And then, to make it even worse, he will sell something like this, a pre-workout. Look at that. Faster, higher, stronger in 59 minutes without chemicals. 59 minutes, not 58, not 60 minutes, it's 59 minutes, and it is without chemicals. Well, you take a look at the label, and what do we see here? Obviously, we see citrulline, tyrosine, hawthorn extract, all of that, obviously chemicals. So this is just nonsense piled upon nonsense, but it is all over the internet, and there are legions of people who buy into this nonsense. Well, let's move up the chain to some of the more notable ones that you may have heard of, such as Dr. Oz. When we first encountered him, he was an irregular guest on Oprah Winfrey's show, and he was very good. You know, he talked about eating broccoli and exercising. And he's a legitimate cardiac surgeon, and he knew what he was talking about. And then Oprah anointed him God and gave him his own TV show. And then, of course, you got to fill 5 hours of network television a week. At first, it was okay. You know, he had mock-ups of the intestine, he walked us through the lungs and explained everything. And it was all very scientific. But that didn't last very long because, as I said, you have to fill 5 hours every week. You got to do more than that. And then they realized that the majority of their audience was essentially overweight, middle-aged women. So therefore, they had to cater to them. And they started a cascade of all kinds of innovations about weight loss. And you may have seen some of these. Dr. Oz recommended raspberry ketones to lose weight, and it had some seductive language associated with it. And that is always, you know, troublesome when you hear this, which has some semblance of science to it. But the fact is there's absolutely no clinical evidence in humans for weight loss with these raspberry ketones. There's some information from Petri dish studies and some animals, but that doesn't really translate to people. And it went on and on. This was the miracle of the week, but it pretty soon disappeared to be replaced by the next miracle, which was green coffee bean extract. And that was, you know, pounded out there for a short time, but then that disappeared as well because you got to keep coming up with new things. But where I really became disenchanted with Dr. Oz was when he introduced his homeopathic starter kit. Now let me tell you a little bit about homeopathy because I know that most people do not know what it really is. I know this because we've done surveys among students, among nurses, among teachers, physicians. They don't know what it is. They think that it is sort of an umbrella term for all the alternative therapies. They will lump together reflexology, acupuncture, all of these things. They think that's homeopathy. This is not so. Homeopathy is a very specific area of pseudo-science, which was first invented over 200 years ago by a German physician by the name of Samuel Hahnemann, who came to the conclusion that giving a healthy person a substance will eventually cause some kind of symptom. And that substance in a diluted form will cure those symptoms in a sick person. That is as illogical as it sounds. There's no science behind that whatsoever. So what homeopaths do is they rely on knowledge about a substance that causes a symptom in a healthy person, and then they use an extremely diluted form of that to try to cure a sick person. Total nonsense. Especially when you take a look at the dilutions. So here's the way it works. You'll take whatever the starting substance is, take 1 drop, add 99 drops of water. Take 1 drop of that, add 99 drops of water, etc. By the time you've done this 12 times, we know that there's not a single molecule of the original left. Not that the original had any value anyway, but never mind that. There's none of that left in there whatsoever. Now, of course, Hahnemann did not know this, because this was before Avogadro. This was before we knew anything about molecules. But now, of course, homeopaths have us scientists breathing down their necks. So they have to come up with a novel rationalization. And they say that these sequential dilutions and shaking the solution between each dilution imprints an image of the molecule on the water, and it is that image which is curative. It's hard to say that without laughing because it is such absolute nonsense. And then, essentially, they give that diluted solution to the patient. What you are really getting is just water. It's as simple as that. But the usual methodology is to take a drop of that water and infuse it into a sugar tablet. That becomes the homeopathic medication, and there's a whole slew of them. There's a whole so-called materia medica of homeopathic products. Some of these are truly incredible. For example, X-ray. Homeopathic X-ray. Now, it is really beyond me how one can dilute an X-ray and to the extent of a 200C, meaning 200 sequential dilutions. But this is what they have. And what would you use this for? It is used for itching and skin rash aggravated at night and in bed. Of course, should you have the skin rash during the day and you're not in bed, supposedly it doesn't work. But this isn't even the ultimate nonsensical homeopathic remedy. Just think about this one, Berlin Wall extract. This is an anti-anxiety medication. Why? Because in the non-logic of homeopathy, the Berlin Wall created anxiety in people. And therefore, a diluted version of that should alleviate the condition. How you dilute the Berlin Wall, they never explain. So, of course, we have a conundrum these days. We have all of this information coming at us from every angle. And the question is, whom should we trust? Whom do we believe? Well, in the scientific world, the answer is very simple. We go by the scientific literature. It is not infallible. I mean, of course, we worship at the altar of peer review, but it's not infallible, because humans are not infallible. That dreadful paper by Andrew Wakefield that linked autism to vaccine, which has caused all the problems in the world, was published in The Lancet, one of the world's leading medical journals. How did that happen? Because when you're a reviewer of a paper, you do not redo the work. Right? I mean, that the work that was submitted was done by, researchers over years. So you can't repeat it. So you have to assume that whatever is submitted is correct. And it will not reveal itself as fraudulent until someone tries to reproduce it, which is what happened. Wakefield basically submitted a totally fraudulent paper. He was trying to cash in on a vaccine he was working on. Anyway, it's a long and convoluted story, but he was a total fraud artist. His medical license was revoked in England, but he still has legions of followers. So even though the scientific literature is not infallible, that's what we have to go by. That's for us in the scientific world, but what about the public out there? They don't read the scientific literature. They're at the mercy of listening to whoever is out there. For example, these days it's RFK. Yes, I'm happy to hear that. Because how this has happened is absolutely incredible. How someone like that with zero scientific knowledge and zero legitimate credibility is at the top of the US health pyramid. What more can you have? You can have a Surgeon General who essentially has no knowledge of how the scientific world works, which is really shocking because she was actually a surgical resident until she left, she says, because she realized that modern medicine wasn't doing what it should be doing, and she wanted to go an alternate route, which is nonsense. She could not handle the stress, and she was kicked out of the program. That's what really happened. So she is now the Surgeon General, with all kinds of ridiculous views about communing with the universe. She vilifies seed oils. I mean, this has become the boogeyman, that, you know, you mustn't eat canola oil, sunflower, safflower oil. This is absolute nonsense. As was pointed out by Dr. Andrea Love, who is really a highly regarded immunologist, and really, this is the truth about the Surgeon General. She's totally incompetent. She doesn't understand how the scientific world works, but she's going to be listened to because Trump plunked her in that position, even without knowing her, which he admits. He went by Kennedy's advice, and what can you say about that? So there's all of this information coming at us from every corner. Anthony William calls himself the medical medium, is a New York Times bestseller with his book, The Medical Medium. He's got a radio show in Florida where he actually answers medical questions despite having zero medical background. How does he get away without being accused of practicing medicine without a license? Because the advice doesn't come directly from him. He contacts the spirit world. And there's a doctor who has passed on, who's now in the spiritual realm, who gives advice. And this is the advice that he then forwards. And no matter what the problem, the advice almost always is to drink celery juice. It is said to be good for absolutely everything. And to just indicate to you how popular such people can be, you may remember, not last summer, but the summer before, celery tripled in price. You had to pay about $6 for a few stalks of celery. That was because he had just come out with his book about celery juice being the cure for everything. And then, of course, there's the curse of the social media. And this really vibrates everyone. The personalities you have on there, like the food babe, self-appointed, that's the name she came up with for herself. No scientific background whatsoever, loads of followers on the internet. One of her mainstay arguments is that if you can't pronounce it, you should not be eating it. So I'm sure if I offered her some beta-fructofuranosyl alpha-D-glucopyranoside, she would be absolutely horrified. But that is just the chemical name for sugar. Now, there are many reasons to cut down on intake of sugar, but the fact that its chemical term is multisyllabic is not one of them. We do not determine the toxicity of a substance by the ability to pronounce its name. It's total nonsense. So I took the liberty of trying to inform her and sent her a couple of books that I thought that she should read. But I don't think that she has read them. Because just last week, she was once again on CNN together with Dr. Marty Makary, who has been appointed head of the FDA, spouting all kinds of nonsense about seed oils and about chemicals from petroleum. Now, you probably heard the stories of removing synthetic dyes from the market that the MAHA movement is after. And I have no issue with that because the truth is that these dyes in food are there for a cosmetic purpose only. They have no nutritional value. And they just attract people to eat foods that generally are of poor nutrition quality. Right? I mean, we don't have synthetic dyes in apples. You know, we don't have them in bananas. You'll have them in Fruit Loops, right? So, no, I don't have any argument against that. I do have an argument, though, about the improper use of science. So, for example, their reason for removing these artificial dyes is because they are made from coal tar or from petroleum. Well, we do not determine the benefits or the risk of any substance by its ancestry. Whether a substance was made by a chemist in a lab or by Mother Nature in a plant is irrelevant. What matters is what that substance is and how we have studied it and how much we know about it. The fact that something is made from petroleum is neither here nor there. What matters is what that material is. So this is just absolute silliness to say that something that comes from petroleum is inherently dangerous. I mean, we make all kinds of things from petroleum. We make nylon from petroleum. We can make some food additives from petroleum. But this idea that food coloring should be banned because of its history, because of what it's made from, makes no scientific sense whatsoever. So, of course, they want to replace it by natural colors. And there are natural colors. I mean, you can extract them from blueberries. You can extract from cabbage juice. They're not quite as vibrant as the synthetic dyes, which is fine. You don't need all those vibrant colors. But one that they are now pushing as a replacement is something called cochineal red. For example, it is the dye that is used in this extract of cherries. And it is a very interesting dye, cochineal red. Indeed, it is as natural, as you'll see in a moment. And this is what is used in strawberry ice cream, cherry ice cream, or maraschino cherries. So they don't want synthetic dyes, they want natural. This is a good natural dye. Where does it come from? It comes from a tiny insect. And these insects are raised on a cactus, mostly in Mexico or in the Canary Islands. They're very small. They're smaller than a cockroach. And when you squeeze them, they let out this reddish color. Now, actually, only the female produces the red dye, the male doesn't. But they are not separated, they're all collected, and then they are ground up. The male is sacrificed for the beauty of the female, and we get a red coloring, which is called carmine. And this is used, as I said, in ice cream. And now it's going to become even more popular because it's natural, although they will go to all ends to make sure that people don't know exactly what the natural source of this is, because people are not going to be thrilled about eating an insect extract, even though there's absolutely nothing wrong with carmine. But I have an interesting little story to tell you about this. Because one day, a while ago on the radio, I was talking about this, and I mentioned the little insect that produces the dye, and I made the mistake, as I made here now, saying that it was smaller than a cockroach. I just used that as an analogy. I get a letter from a lady, whether I would confirm in writing that there are cockroaches in chocolate ice cream. Now, you see what happened here. I talked about ice cream, but it was cherry and strawberry. I talked about cockroaches, which probably was not the best analogy to use for size, but cockroaches are brown. I guess her favorite ice cream was chocolate, so therefore there were cockroaches in chocolate ice cream. No, there are no cockroaches in chocolate ice cream. Although, interestingly enough, you can make cockroaches made of chocolate. I mean, I don't know what the appeal of that is, but you can have cockroach-shaped chocolate. But anyway, you can see what happened here. What happened here was a story like playing telephone, which you may remember having played when you were a kid. You whisper something into an ear, it goes through a few people, and by the time it comes out the other end, it's totally different. This is something that I've experienced over and over again, you know, being in the media, talking on the radios. I say something and I hear back, and it's something totally different from what I actually said. But the carmine story spread around, and in fact, Starbucks actually had to remove the dye from their shake because people were no longer interested in it, seeing that there was insect extract in it. But, you know, by choosing the right terminology, You can make something seem like the devil or like an angel. Let me give you an example. I mean, I think we would all agree that apples are a good thing to eat. They're sort of the proverbial healthy fruit. But if you analyze an apple chemically, this is what you would find. These are not additives, not pesticide residues. These are the components of which the apple is made, right? And that's only a partial list. There are hundreds of substances that are found in an apple. One of these, as you can see, is formaldehyde. Well, formaldehyde, probably know, is a preservative, is a stuff that is used by morticians. This is what is used in embalming because it's an excellent preservative. But formaldehyde is also a carcinogen. It's a known cancer-causing agent, and it's there in the apple, naturally occurring. Also in that apple is acetone. And the last time you may have encountered that was on the label of your nail polish remover, right above where it says do not drink, which is good advice because acetone can be highly toxic. And if that rubs you the wrong way, there's some rubbing alcohol in that apple as well. So by this time, you kind of get the message that when you're biting into an apple, it's actually biting into you. Well, everything I just told you here about the apple is true. It contains formaldehyde, it contains acetone, it contains rubbing alcohol. However, we have to bring in the cornerstone of toxicology as it was first voiced in the 16th century by the great sage Paracelsus, and that is that only the dose makes the poison. This is the critical thing to consider whenever you're talking about toxicity. You may hear the question, is aspirin toxic? Well, depends. You know that aspirin can take a headache away. Well, if you take an aspirin tablet and you lick it, will your headache go away? No. If you swallow 2 tablets, your headache will go away. You swallow the whole bottle of tablets, you will go away. So is aspirin toxic? It depends on the context. Context is critical. The presence of a chemical does not equal to the presence of risk. You have to know how much and what we know about that amount. But today we can determine how much because we have exquisite equipment. My colleagues, the analytical chemists, can now go beyond finding that needle in a haystack. You can find a needle in a world full of haystacks. A part per trillion can be found. You know what that is? Consider the width of a credit card relative to the distance between the Earth and the Moon. That's 1 part per trillion. We can detect that. But just because we find it somewhere doesn't mean that it is doing something. That's a whole different question. Of course, it is also true that there are some substances like botulin and ricin, which in very small doses can be devastating. But nevertheless, it is a question of understanding how much and what that amount can do. We also have to consider that life is full of risks, no matter what you do. You can be out for a casual walk, and terrible things can happen. Oh, don't go, oh, we're nice people, we faked it. They're fine. But they're not the innocent little creatures that you think that they are. Everything in life has risks and benefits, and the question is the proper evaluation of these. You want to make sure that when you're replacing one substance by another, you're not going from the frying pan into the fire. So of course, there's a lot of talk these days about replacing substances like bisphenol A in plastics. But you have to make sure that what you're replacing it with is more innocuous than what you're replacing. Now, of course, there are some risks that you can avoid. That's for sure. And of course, these we should be making use of. because this is a clearly avoidable risk. But the fact is that there are no good or bad chemicals. There are only safe or dangerous ways to use them. And as I mentioned earlier, whether a substance comes from a plant or from a lab doesn't matter. What matters is what it is. You cannot tell anything about its toxicity or its safety by its history. There are some other important points to remember as well, and that is that children are not small adults, and that a substance that may be totally safe in an adult will be potentially deadly in a child when the nervous system is just forming. And you know that a lot of our toxicological data, of course, comes from animal studies. But humans are not giant rats, with some exceptions. Some in very high political positions. Right. And even when we look at animal studies, you have to appreciate that even closely related animals don't behave the same way. If you consider dioxin, which is one of the most toxic substances known, it's never produced on purpose. It's always a byproduct of industry. And if you give it to a guinea pig, it's deadly, but a hamster can frolic in it. Very closely related species. And imagine that we never had chocolate. I know it's a tough thing to imagine, but imagine that. And if it was a new substance and we had to test it, and you say, well, rats, no, they're too far from us, let's test it in dogs. We would never have chocolate, because chocolate is poisonous to dogs. It contains theobromine, which we can handle without any problem. So we can eat chocolate, as much as we want. It is also important to realize that no matter what we do, science can never say that there's no risk with something, because it can never be tested totally. It's certainly possible that we test a novel substance in a subset of the population that might be someone in the backwoods of Siberia who would have an adverse reaction to it. It's possible. You can't test for everything. And it is also clear that scientists will have opposing views. There are constant scientific debates. Some of them are legitimate, some not. But in terms of toxicology, you can find a study to back up almost anything that you want. You can find studies about tomatoes causing cancer or preventing cancer. The same thing for the other foods here. It can go either way because there's so much literature that is published. 5 scientific papers come out every single minute of every day. The only food that no one has found any positives for is bacon, which is the fastest growing food in North America. So the fact is that almost any position can be supported by cherry-picking data, because there's just so much data out there, some of it good, some of it not so good, some of it terrible, but it's all out there, so you can support any view that you have. But in science, we don't cherry-pick. We shake the whole tree, and then we mash up the cherries, and then we taste it. Then we come to some sort of conclusion. But no matter what, we cannot predict everything. Science cannot do that. We can't predict all consequences of our action. Who could have ever predicted back in the 1930s, when Freon replaced sulfur dioxide and ammonia in refrigerators because they were killing people? If you had a leak of ammonia in your kitchen from your fridge, it could be devastating. Freons were a great replacement because they, inert, no health problems. Who could have ever predicted that they would make their way into the upper atmosphere and 50 years later create havoc? No one could have thought about that. Another thing that we really have to be aware of is that correlation is not the same as causation. Ice cream sales go up in the summer and sunburns go up in the summer as well. But sunburns do not cause you to eat ice cream, and ice cream doesn't cause sunburn, right? They just happen to be associated. The same way that breast cancer is associated with wearing skirts, but skirts do not cause the disease. And I point this out because you will see things like this where they will show you a graph about the use of glyphosate, which is a weed killer, which has really been increasing, and an increasing incidence of autism, implying that the two go together. Well, that's an association or correlation. It doesn't mean causation, because you can also draw a graph between autism and sales of organic foods, which also is a one-to-one correspondence, and obviously we don't think that organic foods cause autism. So science is a complex undertaking, and it is not a collection of unalterable truths. Certainty is elusive, and we change our minds when new information comes to light. The best medicine against misinformation and disinformation is education, which needs to start early on. I think we need to have more scientific education in elementary schools, because minds there are like a sponge, and kids are curious, and curiosity is to science what a spark is to a flame. And you've got to get them curious early on, and hopefully continue through high school. We need, obviously, more education. As you know, it's very obvious when we look what is happening in the US, when you have people in the highest power who have no scientific background, no appreciation, no understanding of science, whereas science guides our everyday life. So we need to foster critical thinking, which comes with scientific education. And that's really the way to get rid of all of the BS that is out there. And that's the best weapon we have for separating the sense from the nonsense, which is really the mission that we have. But as I told you at the beginning, it is a very challenging undertaking. So I suspect that there may be some burning questions out there that you want to ask. I'll be happy to try to deal with them. I'll also tell you that we do have a website, and we do have a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for on the website. It's obviously free. And it has articles that are of general interest and I think are educational. And I also answer emails about whatever question you may have. So if anyone does have any question or observations, certainly be happy to try to deal with them.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Is there any difference chemically between real vanilla and artificial vanilla?
Very good question. Very good question. We can actually make vanilla taste more like vanilla than vanilla tastes like vanilla. Let me explain that. The most important flavor ingredient in vanilla is a compound called vanillin. Okay? Vanilla comes from an orchid. It's a bean that grows on an orchid. You extract it with alcohol, you get vanilla flavoring, which has dozens of compounds in there, but the most prevalent one that gives you the flavor is vanillin. We can make vanillin in the lab. It is structurally identical to the vanillin that is found in the plant. Those two molecules are exactly the same. However, the natural version also has more subtlety because it has some of the other compounds in there that also contribute to the flavor. But we can then take our synthetic vanillin molecule, which is called methyl vanillin, and slightly alter it by replacing one carbon with two carbons in this molecule and make ethyl vanillin, which has a more potent vanilla flavor than the original vanillin. So that's why I said we can make vanilla taste more like vanilla than the natural vanilla tastes like vanilla. But as I said, you will find that a small difference in taste between the synthetic and the natural, because the natural has other compounds in it than just vanillin. But there is certainly no toxicity issue because the vanillin is the same.
About the
There you go.
Sounded like you are on a mission to separate science from bad science or
Pseudo-science.
pseudo-science. May I suggest Trump is on the same path? Except your approaches may be different. Like you are, educating us, and thank you for it. And he may be doing the same thing by employing all of those people, saying, "Okay, I'm going to teach you a lesson, and this is your, this is RFK. He's going to tell you some things that'll kill you, and such." Could it have the same result at the end?
Well, depends, what result you're looking for. I mean, RFK and the whole Maha movement has some positive points. Even a blind squirrel sometimes finds an acorn, right? And that's the analogy for Kennedy. He does want to get, or at least minimize, the consumption of highly processed or ultra-processed foods. But this is not a Maha invention. The scientific community for decades has been urging people to cut down on sugar, to cut down on salt, to eat more fruits and vegetables. Kennedy did not invent this, right? He's usurping the legitimate scientific message that was always out there. But yes, it is a good idea to try to improve the American diet, which is generally dreadful. When the recommendation is to eat 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and the American average is 1.8, and that counts French fries as a vegetable. So obviously there's a need and room for improvement. So yes, some of that is true, but vilifying canola oil and sunflower oil is, absolute nonsense. And also saying that anything that is made from petroleum has to be eliminated is also nonsense. So, there is some sense there mixed in with the nonsense. But we have enough scientific knowledge and enough knowledgeable people to serve properly in the US government. We have real smart scientists who could be at the top of FDA and NIH. We don't need the likes of Kennedy. So yes, some of the messaging is okay that comes from Kennedy. I don't think any of the messaging that comes from Trump is okay. He's just the devil incarnate. But I think Kennedy has said some right things, but mostly nonsense things.
I was thinking about your comment about homeopathy, and you criticized it on the basis that its underlying principles make no sense, because you keep diluting and diluting and diluting to the point that there's nothing much left of the original. That may well be true, but that seems to me to be the wrong way of judging the merits or otherwise of homeopathy or anything else. The right way to test it would be to see if homeopathic drugs in fact cure.
You're absolutely right.
I don't know if there are many studies that have done that, but that would be the right test of testing homeopathy.
You're absolutely right. There are hundreds of studies that have done that. If you like, I can furnish you with the scientific literature on that. Numerous studies that have looked at double-blind fashion of homeopathic remedies against placebo. It is a placebo. Now, placebos do have some value. If you feel better, you feel better, right? Whether it comes from the mind or from anything else, okay. But I tell you where the problem with that is that while you may feel better, it doesn't mean that you are better. A placebo will never cure an underlying disease. It will never treat the organic problem. That's the problem. And I've seen so many cases where people who believe in homeopathy or some other alternative treatment have eschewed proper medical treatment, which could conceivably have worked, because they became convinced that this was the route to go. I absolutely have no objection to someone diagnosed with some terrible illness trying everything, as long as you are cognizant of the fact that medical treatment is available, and it may not work for that. I mean, certainly I can understand someone who's diagnosed with something like pancreatic CA, which is just a horrific outcome, and proper medicine doesn't have much to offer. I totally understand people reaching for everything, from homeopathy to coffee enemas to the numerous other things that are out there. But as I said, we go by the scientific literature, and I mean, your question is legitimate, but the answer is that there are numerous studies that have tested homeopathy against. So it's not that we dismiss it because it is scientifically absurd, which it is, because there's just no evidence for it.
We have a question from the internet.
Okay, I have a question from Susan Nasrallah from Carleton University. These days, beginning in roughly 20 years ago, not sure, milk, bread, juice, butter, for example, lasts much longer in the fridge than years ago. Milk and juice used to go sour within a few days. What are they putting in foods now that makes everything last so much longer?
Okay, well, I mean, the question is about preservatives, but there's a whole area. There are many, many preservatives used in many different foods. Milk is not one of them. There's no preservative that is added to milk. So if your milk lasts longer in the fridge now than it used to, it's because you have a better fridge. Not because of anything that is being put in there. Now, in terms of some of the juices, yes, you'll have things like sodium benzoate, sodium propionate. These are antimicrobial substances. But any substance that is added to food has to go through all the regulatory hoops and hurdles. It's not a question of some producer saying, well, I would like to put this into the food. In Canada, you have to convince Health Canada, in the US FDA, with proper studies. And it's a long process until some food additive is allowed. Can we say they're 100% beyond reproach? You can never say that with anything. I mean, people can have allergic reactions to anything, whether it's natural or whether it's an additive.
Dr. Schwarcz, two last questions, and that's it, because we're really...
Okay, two more.
There's one there, and then one there, and that's it. Thank you.
For some time, I've been concerned reading some articles that evidently have been published in peer-reviewed journals and so forth. I have an old university friend who seems to find these obscure things, and I read them. I've even gone through some of the study data and so forth, and I just shake my head, and I think, as you said, how do these things get published? And my question for you, I suspect that these are, the researchers are trying to make a name for themselves somehow. I don't know whether their data is fixed or whatever, or their sample is somehow fixed, but is this misinformation or is it disinformation? What's the motivation?
It's a mixture. I mean, I've seen some in each category. And as you said, it is often because we still have the publish or perish situation out there, and that people are promoted based on things that they have published. People are hired based on what they have published. And there are also a lot of what we call predatory journals that will publish anything for a charge. You pay a page charge, they will publish anything. And they can sound very seductive. You know, I mean, there have been all kinds of interesting stories about people writing up total nonsensical papers just to see if they can get published, and they can, you know. So it's a mix. I mean, there's a lot of just poor science out there, especially in the world of nutritional research, because that is very difficult to do. You know, most nutritional research is based on questionnaires. People are asked about what they have eaten. And, you know, usually it's about what they have eaten, let's say, over the last 6 months or over a year. People don't remember that properly. They also can't evaluate amounts properly, you know. So it's very difficult to do nutritional information. People misremember, or sometimes they are dishonest because they would rather say what they think they should have eaten instead of what they ate. I mean, studies have shown that when you do these questionnaires, people eat more broccoli than the world has ever produced, you know? So it's a mixture of bad science and disinformation, and yeah, it's part of the problem.
We're going to alternate between in-person and virtual.
Let's take this question.
And then that's going to have to be in.
Yes, that's right. Sorry.
Do you want my question? Right. Right. I'd like to suggest that you have no evidence at all that educating children will make them will solve the problem and will make them produce better, have better beliefs and reduce their misinformation.
Actually,
given what we learned this morning about the way children learn right now, so it depends on your definition of education, and what we learned about artificial intelligence, which we have learned is hopelessly corrupt and is going to be more corrupt until we do something about it. So I'd like to propose to you that the fix for all this has to be how we manage artificial intelligence and how we manage the way children learn, because they're not learning in the right way right now.
I think the fix is how you manage natural intelligence. That's the real fix. And I do have evidence for educating children because I've, for years and years, run a program in elementary schools on children who I've kept track of. And a number of them eventually have made it to McGill. And I get feedback from them. And they do extremely well in my courses. And when I talk to them, they universally tell me that they were sparked by what we had done decades before. So no, it's not, you know, I don't have all the statistics on that, but I'm a firm believer that you can generate interest in children, which will make them read more about science, get more involved in science, get involved in their high school science fairs, which is, I think, a good thing. The artificial intelligence, yes, artificial intelligence is a problem. It has its ups and its downs. I mean, some of it is just unbelievable what you can do these days. When you go into ChatGPT and ask a question, and within a fraction of a second, get your answer. Now, of course, the question is it correct? And I mean, I've been struggling with this now, you know, ever since ChatGPT came out. And what I can tell you is that when you look at historical stuff, you ask it to give you an essay on Louis XIV, it will be spectacular. It will be, you know, free of errors, you know. But if you ask it for something that is more controversial or that involves, you know, greater interpretation, there it becomes more sketchy. But I've also found, just since I've been following it for a couple of years, that it's getting better and better. And the information is more reliable when you check it out. So AI, I think, is going to have positive aspects, but it will never be free of problems, just like everything else. It's always going to be a risk of benefits against risk. Well, I'm going to leave you with one last idea. Because I presented you with a puzzles. That's what I did here. Science is all about solving puzzles. I'm going to give you a chance to see how good you are at solving puzzles. I have this gizmo here which has straight edges and hinges. And the question is, how many geometric shapes can I make? Obviously, I can make a square, make a parallelogram. I can make a triangle. In fact, I can make 2 triangles. I can make a pentagon. The question is, can I make a circle? We have straight edges and hinges. Impossible, right? But in science, sometimes you have to think out of the box. You have to think in a different dimension. And you can make a circle out of a square. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one last question that comes from a virtual participant. So one more, but that will be the last.
Susan Nasrallah, she's saying, is acupuncture effective?
Oh, for some things. Acupuncture is not a cure-all for everything. I think there are more studies to show that it acts as a placebo effect than anything else. However, there are some conditions for which it really seems to work beyond the placebo. For example, shoulder injuries, like tennis shoulder injuries, it seems to work well. For some localized pain, knee pain, it seems to work, but it's certainly not a cure-all for anything, but neither would I lump it into the nonsense category. Although where you stick the needles doesn't seem to much matter. So, you know, when you look at the so-called traditional Chinese medicine with the meridians and the qi channels and all of this, and the notion that you stick a needle in there and opens up an energy channel, that doesn't make any sense. But for some reason, sticking the needles can trigger the release of internal opiates. The body has compounds called endorphins, which mimic the action of morphine, or at least I should say morphine happens to mimic the action of these chemicals that naturally occur in the body. So acupuncture seems to trigger the release of these endomorphins.
Dr. Schwarcz, thank you very much, Dr. Schwarcz. For a very informative and entertaining talk. And so we have a...
Thank you. Thank you.